Who do you trust more, Poilievre or Carney? Welcome to my channel, y'all. I hope you're having a great day. Pierre held a news conference today in Nanaimo, and he covered a bunch of things. First off, he obviously covered the trade war between Canada and the US, and then he went on to talk about crime. I'm not going to cover the crime stuff in this video, but I do think that we obviously need to go back to the trade war and see what he had to say, because what he has to say makes a lot more sense than what Carney has to say, and how he says it is quite a bit different as well.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today in beautiful British Columbia. I'd like to thank Stephen Hoffer and Corrine Stavness for hosting us at Duke Point Sawmill, Western Forest Products. They make wonderful products here that come out of our forests and go into homes and into decking, fencing, paneling, molding, serving domestic and world markets. They are the best of Canada. They bring home the Canadian promise for their workers who get a great paycheck selling wonderful products. But unfortunately, after the lost Liberal decade, that promise is broken. Workers work longer and harder for less. Housing costs have doubled, so our youth can no longer afford a place to live. Liberal taxes punish work, and Liberal inflation has driven 2 million people every month to food banks. This was all before President Trump first threatened his tariffs against Canada. I was glad to learn that the President and Prime Minister spoke today, and like all Canadians, I hope they had a successful talk, and I look forward to hearing about the results that they achieved in that conversation for Canadians. But regardless of what was said, what is now clear is that it was a mistake over the lost Liberal decade to weaken our economy and become more dependent on the Americans. Liberals blocked pipelines, LNG plants, port expansions, and other major projects because of a radical net zero ideology that has now made us more reliant on the Americans than ever before. We need to break that reliance. We need to put Canada first for a change by axing taxes on our industries to bring home more production, by lowering taxes on workers so they can spend at local small businesses, creating made-in-Canada jobs, by removing Liberal laws, C-69, the No New Pipelines law, by getting rid of the energy cap and the industrial carbon tax to bring production back to this country so that we can stand on our own 2 feet and stand up to the Americans with economic sovereignty. In other words, let's put Canada first.
As usual, Pierre gave a very articulate and very good message. He speaks well in front of the camera, and you know where he stands. Compare that to Carney, who is often quite vague and doesn't seem to have a plan that he hasn't stolen from the Conservatives. And then he goes and says this.
Our biggest challenge as a country is becoming the most urgent. Over the coming weeks, months, and years, we must fundamentally reimagine our economy. We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over.
Of course, it's been said many times by many people that the only constant in life is change. But to say that our relationship with the United States is over, well, that's pretty strong. Now, one could argue he didn't actually say that, but he used very strong words, and it almost sounds like he wants to separate ties completely. But what really concerned me is what he said first, is that we have to restructure our economy, basically. He didn't use those words, but he basically said that. And what does that mean? As a member of the WEF, as one of their top executives, one of the top people in that organization, that means the Great Reset. And that should scare everybody, because as you know, they want you to own nothing and be happy. And that could explain why his first trip as the installed Prime Minister of Canada was not to the US, but was to Europe to speak to his WEF buddies.
All of these initiatives will go a very long way to offsetting the costs of these tariffs if they are permanent, and they will help to realize our potential as a nation. But there's even more to do. And that's why I chose to go to France and the United Kingdom, two long-standing and reliable partners, friends, and allies of Canada. And it's why the time will come for a broad renegotiation of our security and trade relationship with the United States.
He didn't go into detail of what he actually discussed in the UK and France in this press conference, but we do know that he talked about closer economic ties. We also know that he talked about the possibility of Canada actually joining the EU, which of course is completely silly. We're not even part of Europe, and it would be completely stupid for us to do so. The EU has proven to be disastrous. In fact, Britain even left the EU a couple of years ago. So for Canada to consider that is completely insane. What he wants to do, though, is to replace our relationship with the U.S. with a relationship with Europe. But to end our relationship with the U.S. in favor of a relationship with Europe is completely insane. Of course, in response to this, and in response to Carney's trip to Europe, Donald Trump responded with posts on Truth Social. Let's have a look at what he said then and what he's saying today after he had a conversation with Mark Carney. If the European Union works with Canada in order to do economic harm to the USA, large-scale tariffs, far larger than currently planned, will be placed on them both in order to protect the best friend each of those two countries ever had. It seems Donald Trump is taking a shot at the EU, calling them one country instead of an amalgamation or a union of countries. So I thought that was actually kind of funny, kind of subtle, and kind of funny. But what a difference a day and a phone call can make, because Mark Carney and Donald Trump have spoken now. And afterwards, Donald Trump posted this. I just finished speaking with Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada. It was an extremely productive call. We agree on many things, and we will be meeting immediately after Canada's upcoming election to work on elements of politics, business, and all other factors. That will end up in being great for both the United States of America and Canada. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, of course, this is just one post on Truth Social, so we don't know for sure if Trump is done with his trolls on Canada becoming the 51st state. But it does kind of look like he's heading in that direction. He's not calling Mark Carney the governor of the great state of Canada, and he's not saying how glorious it would be for us to merge as a nation. He's kind of supporting Mark Carney to become the Prime Minister of Canada. He wants Mark Carney to be. In fact, he said that last week. So what if, even though so many Canadians have Trump derangement syndrome, what if this doesn't matter to them and they still vote Mark Carney in? Well, I think that would lead to a national unity crisis. Danielle Smith has said that on numerous occasions, and it looks like there may be a referendum coming if the Liberals get reelected. As a matter of fact, this lawyer that I'm about to show you now, he is spearheading a delegation to Washington in order to feel out whether or not there is real support for Alberta joining the United States, or whether or not there'd be real support from the U.S. for Alberta to become an independent nation. Let's take a look at what he said recently at a news conference in Calgary.
A federal election is not going to change the inequities of Canadian federalism or change the structure of the Canadian Constitution. So we're proceeding regardless. On current polling, to the extent that Ontario, all of the so-called have-not provinces in Canada are going to elect a Carney government so that they can keep drawing money out of Alberta to subsidize inefficient governments in those jurisdictions. I think that all but guarantees, on the basis of the demands that Danielle Smith put forward to the government, that there will be a referendum this year and that the referendum will succeed. I think the election of a Carney government basically spells the end of Canada as we presently know it.
Canada would consider an energy embargo on the United States. And I want to, as leverage, what do you think, what do you make of what she said?
Well, first of all, it's Oil and gas is owned by the provinces, principally Alberta, and we won't stand for that. And you should never, ever threaten something you cannot do.
If they were to proceed down that path for some reason, what would be Alberta's response?
Well, they will have a national unity crisis on their hands at the same time as having a crisis with our U.S. trade partners.
And she's mentioned at least twice since then that there will be a national crisis if that happens. And as a matter of fact, the last time she spoke about it, she actually talked about starting conversations concerning whether or not Alberta should leave Confederation. So I believe it was in the context of that they would have town halls and meetings and going around to the different communities. So I think she's actually pretty serious about this. So what can we glean from what has happened in the last couple of days? Well, first, I think that Donald Trump has what he wants. He's got a very malleable prime minister, somebody that he can use to get what he wants. But does Trump really know who Mark Carney is? Does Trump really know how much of a globalist he is, how connected he is to the WEF, and how he basically wants to sever ties with the US and build ties with Europe, how he quite possibly wants to be part of a global government, because that's essentially where the WEF is heading. And I wouldn't be surprised if this whole trade war was a WEF planned scam in order to get Canada to sever ties with the US and become more of a globalist nation. One thing for sure, if we can't turn this around, if we can't get Pierre Poilievre elected, then Canada's done. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to know what you think. Put your comments down below. And while you're at it, please like this video, share with your friends and on social media. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification so you never miss another video. Also, please join me on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific time for my live stream, where you're invited to join in on the conversation. Finally, if you wish to get your Canadian firearms license, I teach the required courses. So if you reside on Vancouver Island and you want to take a course from me, there are links in the show notes of this video to my website where you can sign up for one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.